of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Senior Policy Analyst Krista Brown and Senior Fellow Moe Tkacik with the American Economic Liberties Project on the Ticketmaster hearings, and in fact, Ticketmaster's Dark History. Also on the program today, U.S. and Germany send tanks to Ukraine. Kevin McCarthy dumps Schiff and Solwell from the Select Intel Committee. However, Democrats are whipping votes to block McCarthy's attempt to remove Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Relations Committee. Also on the program today, free speech absolutely notist Elon Musk censors the BBC documentary on Modi. George Santos now says he didn't loan himself $700,000, but won't say who did. Average wage increases in the second half of 2022 finally beating inflation. However, Fed gears up to attack labor. FDA proposes lead limits for baby food. Will this be the next conservative freakout? Republicans gear up to attack Social Security. Bradley, get ready with that sound drop we had talked about earlier. Marjorie Taylor Greene attempting to be Donald Trump's, or I should say angling to be Donald Trump's vice president. And Bernie Sanders, now chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, is contemplating calling Howard Schultz to testify on Starbucks' union busting.
And maybe we need a solution to it that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility.
New possibilities at the Help Committee.
There you go. We can roll up. We can be done with the show now. I'm satisfied. All this, and I guess more, on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Emma out today. She'll be back tomorrow. We got a lot to talk about today, and we will take your phone calls. We may even do like a slightly. I don't know. I'm not gonna promise anything. I never fall through. There, I do remember there was. I remember specifically years ago finding a quote that was something. It was like I think it was a blues song, and it was something like, I know I promise more than I do, but I need to promise more to do what I end up doing, or something to that effect. So there it is. There has to be a bunny rabbit in front of me, or like a running around the track. So there's got to be a pull. Never mind.
You need to find Sam a new bunny rabbit.
There we go. Yeah.
To get him around the track.
This FDA lead thing is going to be a big deal, I imagine, with the right wing, because
let us ingest lead.
Well, look, the point is, and I'll say this in a bit because I want to go into it deeper later, but I grew up and I was ingesting lead in baby food. And kids have been doing this for years and years. And in fact, we had unleaded gas, we had leaded gasoline. People were ingesting lead for years and years. It is the American way. The idea that they're now coming after our lead in baby food. After doing this with the light bulbs and doing it with the gas stoves.
One of the first places I would maybe look to get lead out of.
It's an American tradition, Matt. And this is just one more in the way that the libs are trying to get rid of our culture. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Here we go. So, as I said in the headlines, McCarthy has been able to basically kick Schiff and Swalwell off of the Intelligence Committee. This is a select committee. So in other words, the Speaker of the House selects who's going to be on this committee. They've got to do a certain amount based upon the split in the House, but who it will sit on it, the Speaker has the ability to determine. However, for the Foreign Relations Committee, this is one where it's not a select committee, and there must be a vote to kick someone off. Democrats are attempting to whip votes in favor of keeping Ilhan Omar on the committee, and it sounds like Democrats are basically all on board, which is, no small thing, because there are a lot of virulent Israel supporters in the Democratic caucus who are adamant that there be no criticism of Israel, and probably also not terribly excited by Ilhan Omar being a Muslim woman. And yet they're going to support her bid to be on this committee. So good for them. I don't want to go overboard with that, but good for them. And
I think there's certain votes Ilhan has taken recently that are maybe confusing from a left foreign policy perspective that I think maybe explain how she got some of these Democrats on board with getting her back in this situation.
It's possible. I mean, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that, this is you've got 212 or 11 colleagues, and if you want to build power within a caucus, the way you build power is sometimes by giving what is not necessarily hugely important to you in that moment, or hugely, you got to pick what battles you fight. That's basically what it comes down to.
No one to hold them.
And people can take issue with which battles, she's fought or not. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, a valuable voice on the Foreign Relations Committee, in my estimation, and we will see if there are any Republican defections. And in some ways, it's going to be an interesting litmus test for those who think that there's that this is possible in the future. But here is Kevin McCarthy, and I'm of two minds here. One is that he's an idiot and doesn't really know how to address the press whatsoever, and doesn't seem to realize what questions he's going to get. Or, and maybe these aren't mutually exclusive, he also knows that he's only playing to 48% of the country, 47% of the country. And that is the Republican Party, the conservative base. And they like somebody who won't answer questions to the press. Period.
Intel committee. Is Santos on the Intel committee? Am I allowing Schiff to be on other committees? Go right ahead.
Respectfully, thank you. Because you have direct power over who goes on the intelligence committee, you also will be able to raise for your full House, taking off other Democrats, perhaps Representative Omar. But you have said that lying to us is something that means you should be removed from the intelligence committee. But why is it not a factor?
Well, let me just reiterate what the reporter is saying, because you can't quite hear it. Understand, McCarthy only has unilateral power to keep people off of a select committee, and that's in the Intel committee. And he's saying, I'm not keeping, Schiff and Swalwell off of other committees because he doesn't have unilateral power to do that. And Ilhan Omar is going to be a tougher fight than Schiff and Swalwell because she is a Muslim woman and much easier for the Republicans to vote against her, frankly, and seem, reasonable. But the reporter is saying, you said the reason why you're keeping Swalwell and Schiff off of those committees is because they're liars. So if lying is really your thing, you could definitely keep Santos off a committee because you're in charge of his caucus. And so Santos is, he's certainly not the only liar, but he's the most flagrant liar. Like, you have Republicans in his home district who are chairing the Republican Party in his district saying he's a pathological liar. And so McCarthy has to answer that question. It never occurred to him, apparently, that if I set up the standard liar, what am I going to do about Santos, who's like literally like a con man? If he's even rational enough to be a con man, but go ahead.
He's gotten elected by his district. So, okay, let me be very clear and respectful to you. You ask me a question. When I answer it, it's the answer to your question. You don't get to determine whether I answer your question or not, okay? In all respect. Thank you. No, let's answer her question. You just raised a question. I'm going to be very clear with you. The Intel Committee is different. You know why? Because what happens in the Intel Committee, you don't know. What happens in the Intel Committee, although the secrets are going on in the world, other members of Congress don't know. What did Adam Schiff do as the chairman of the Intel Committee? What Adam Schiff did, use his power as a chairman and lie to the American public. Even the Inspector General said it. When Devin Nunes put out a memo, he said it was false. When we had a laptop, he used it before an election to be politics and say that it was false and said it was the Russians. When he knew different, when he knew the intel, if you talk to John Radcliffe, DNI, he came out ahead of time and says there's no intel to prove that, and he used his position as chairman, knowing he has information the rest of America does not, and lied to the American public.
Well, wait a second. I don't understand how Radcliffe came out beforehand and said and announced this about information that Schiff had that they didn't have. How did Radcliffe have that information and announce it to the public? The problem that McCarthy is having is that he didn't do a narrow situation. Like he wanted to come out because he knows that these guys are loathed by the right wing because of their leading the charge on impeachment. And so he made it about them. And then when reporters start going like, well, wait a second, don't you claim that you weren't knocking people off of committees like Nancy Pelosi did? Well, and then it's a principle. And then he had to articulate the principle, and he had never developed the principle. That's the problem.
Should have kept it on the individual level, the petty level.
Exactly. Frankly, I don't care about Schiff or Swalwell being on the Intel Committee. I don't feel strongly about that. I'm more concerned about Ilhan Omar being on foreign relations, and I don't know what McCarthy's justification for that is, other than the fact that we know that you're a woman of color and particularly Muslim, and you're outspoken and
a lot of questions.
Got to be careful.
Can't be too careful about this stuff.
Why would we put someone who's...
Let me say something very clear.
Who was from foreign relations?
Foreign having relations with itself? I don't think so.
Doesn't make sense. We'll get to Krista Brown and Moe Tkacik in just a moment to talk about Ticketmaster. God, what a horrible company. And an important sort of a question of antitrust. And these things, understand, one antitrust action begets others. That's why this stuff is so important. But before we get there, I've spoken many times about how uptight I am about my ID being stolen online. Like, I'm the type of person who freezes his credit accounts and do all this. But still, it almost feels like there's not enough protection. Well, always, frankly. I've had many passwords and accounts hacked, and the way they do it, there's two different ways to do it. It's either through a phishing scam, or they get your password and your email combination from a site that has a data leak, and then they just go around to a bunch of different sites
trying that,
and they try that combination.
That happened with me in less.fm.
There
they
you
got a leak like 8 years ago.
Yep. Benjamin just had his Twitter account hacked. He still hasn't quite figured out how they did it.
Holy crap.
That's why today I'm excited to partner with our sponsor, Aura. Aura is an easy-to-use app that includes everything you need to stay safe online. Aura protects you from scammers and hackers because they scan the so-called dark web, not to be confused with the intellectual dark web, where criminals sell stolen information. They look for your emails, they look for your passwords, they look for your social security numbers, and if they find anything, they alert you fast about it. To help you fight back against those annoying websites that make your personal information public, by sending on an automatic basis, regular basis, request removal of your info. Now, you could do that on your own if you wanted to email these like 50 places every couple of weeks to remind them to take your stuff down. But Aura does it for you. They give you near real-time alerts on suspicious credit inquiries. So I've used this example 100 times. I open up a bank account for Mila for her savings, supposedly savings, although she's doing all right with it. But as soon as I did, within like hours, I get a notice, hey, you should know that someone's just opened up another bank account in your name, and I knew it was me. All was well. They have a VPN, which allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and your personal information safe and encrypted. They protect your devices from viruses and malware and spyware and all that crap. Or even helps you manage what your kids can do on their devices. So you can restrict specific apps. You can set screen time limits. You can set focus times to ensure that your kid's doing their homework if they've got to be on their computers instead of like watching YouTube or something like that. They have a password manager, lets you store and access your online passwords securely and conveniently. And maybe you have an app that does one of these things. Maybe you have two apps that do two of them. This does all of them. You don't need 7 apps anymore. So let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up now at Aura, they're going to give you a 2-week free trial with my link. You're going to be shocked at how much your private information Aura finds exposed over those 2 weeks. Go to aura.com, A-U-R-A, aura.com/majority. Start your free trial. It'll be linked in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to senior policy analyst and a senior fellow, Krista Brown and Moe Tkacik with the American Economic Liberties Project about the dark history of Ticketmaster and to what extent it was exposed yesterday in Senate hearings. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Senior Policy Analyst Krista Brown and Senior Fellow Moe Tkacik of the American Economic Liberties Project. Welcome, guys. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure.
So you guys wrote a real big piece on Ticketmaster's Dark History, and it's entitled that at theprospect.org. And folks can get a little bit of a taste. Mo, I know you put up a thread yesterday in sort of like anticipation of both you guys watching the hearings yesterday. Let's just go into the history a little bit of Ticketmaster. I have to say that when I read the piece, like it all sort of came back to me. Like I grew up in Boston area. I remember Don Law. I remember like the sort of the evolution of these things. I remember when, Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam did this stuff, and being skeptical of what their motives were because I was a fan of Nirvana, Teen Spirit, and so I was just skeptical of the whole thing and didn't pay that much attention, and now I feel like an ass for that. So, Mo, do you want to start with maybe that early history of Ticketmaster?
Yeah, I was definitely on Team Kurt in those squabbles. I was 15 when this was happening, so I remember it pretty vividly, and I remembered more what happened afterwards in terms of just the tsunami of consolidation in the entertainment industry that took something that I thought was pretty great, which was American pop culture of the early 90s. And turned it into just this really tyrannically vacuous cesspool. And as it turns out, these things were connected. It kind of all started with the crushing of Pearl Jam. But where it really started was in the 80s. And there were a couple of moguls and the concert promoter. There was this sort of loosely organized cartel of regional concert promoters that Ticketmaster kind of lent money to bid up the prices of high profile acts and split the fees with. So the CEO of Ticketmaster back in the 80s, with this guy Fred Rosen and his friend Irving Azoff, who at the time was CEO of MCA. They really were almost plotting, I feel like, in the 80s to dominate the music industry, and we're living that reality today. But Pearl Jam.
And can I just add? I just want to say, just for context, the early to mid to late 80s seemed to be, and maybe I'm wrong, but seemed to be the absolute pinnacle of the touring world of concerts. I mean, I worked at a parking lot in Worcester next to our civic center, and it was constant. It was a 13,000 person arena, and it was booked every weekend. The touring was amazing at that time.
I think that there was definitely a really vibrant scene, and back then it was, like I said, it was a loosely controlled cartel. There were a lot of very powerful promoters. They were putting a lot of money. There's a legendary Canadian promoter named Michael Cole who offered the Rolling Stones $55 million for one concert tour. And this was unheard of back in the day. And I'm pretty sure that money was fronted by Ticketmaster. So that kind of got this whole thing off the ground, where every big act really felt like they needed to tour every year. It gradually turned into a more sort of centrally controlled, and now it's much more kind of, it's a less extravagant industry. There's a lot more cost cutting, a lot more classic corporate bullshit.
Well, let's Krista, talk about those hearings with Pearl Jam, because and how they sort of I guess sort of decided why they had a problem with Ticketmaster, and then how they got sort of pulled in to testify, and how they just got crushed after that.
Yeah, it's a pretty depressing part of the story, but basically they wanted to make their tour affordable, and Ticketmaster was demanding a higher fee attached to their face value. They wanted to keep it under $20. So they decided, like, we're going to basically attempt a tour avoiding Live Nation and Ticketmaster's services, really just Ticketmaster's services. And amidst all that, they came up against a bunch of retaliatory behavior where venues had ticketing services shut off, kind of inexplicably so. And then immediately, like right before the concert turned back on, but definitely a threatening move from Ticketmaster. And amongst all this, you know, they were pretty public about it. And the DOJ asked them to write a complaint. The DOJ had been kind of watching Ticketmaster ever since 1991 when they merged with Ticketron. Although that merger probably should have been blocked, it wasn't. And so the DOJ, basically said, can you, to help us kind of announce an investigation, write a complaint about what you've experienced? So they did. And the DOJ, announced an investigation. But within a year after the hearing, it was dropped with like a 2-sentence explanation. It kind of made no sense. The explanation was, well, there appears to be competition, or like venues are willingly going into these agreements, so it can't be a monopoly. But when you kind of like uncover what actually happened, there's a lot of pretty blatant corruption, actually, where Phil Graham, who was the head of the Appropriations Committee at the time, had a very close relationship with this man, Charlie Black, who was a strong lobbyist. His wife was the head of government affairs. They hired her in the midst of all of these investigations to be Ticketmaster's head of government affairs. So there's just a bunch of inner workings that I wish we had more to uncover, but we definitely at least highlighted a little bit of it.
And to be clear, when you say set the ticket prices, and I don't think people sort of like, I certainly didn't understand this at the time, that Ticketmaster would, that the way that prices get, the way that tickets get priced, it's not like we're going to charge $20 and Ticketmaster says, okay, well, we take our 10%. And then so the ticket will cost $21. They actually set the prices of the tickets?
Well, so Pearl Jam will say, we want to price our ticket. Mo, do you remember the exact pricing they had for that tour, the 1995 tour?
They determined basically that they would need to be around $18 to break even. So they were only trying to break even. Pearl Jam had sold a monstrous number of records. They were just looking to not lose money on the tour because they regularly did lose money playing charity events. And
then they tacked on, so it was Ticketmaster that said, we'll tack on this $2 above a $2 fee. Yeah.
What it was that
Pearl Jam wanted $2.
When Pearl Jam wanted to not go above $2, and what Ticketmaster really resented was that Pearl Jam was trying to negotiate. They were kind of looking down the whole kind of supply chain. And Ticketmaster really reserved the right to make the service charges whatever they needed to be to pay off all of the ancillary middlemen involved. And that was sort of...
Wait, Mo, can I chime in there?
Sure.
It's when they say, like, what Ticketmaster needs, Ticketmaster gained almost all of its power through these exclusive contracts with venues that they would pay an upfront charge. It was like $500,000 at times to the venue to gain exclusivity and jack up fees for the customer to cover that. So it was like, we're going to loss lead almost, and then recoup through fees from the fans. And that had never been the case before.
And
this is sort of like it's like a pre-kickback, right? That's basically what it is. It's a kickback, but it comes, you're reversing the sort of like the sequencing of the kickback. So you're eliminating before there's even, and people should understand what this dynamic is. Before there's even a tour, before even Pearl Jam's there, they have basically purchased, they've basically rented almost every facility, or they've bought options on all these facilities. And and you need us before there's even an act. And then it's basically just a kickback.
And they recoup the funds through the service fees. Yeah, they extended loans. I mean, by the 90s, the advances that they would give to venues were up to $5 million. But they also gave non-recourse loans to concert promoters to front the money that they needed to bid on the act. So that's, again, how and rock stars, in a lot of cases, they didn't like this game, but they didn't see any way of sort of going against it, especially after Pearl Jam. With Pearl Jam, what they were trying to do is teach a lesson, and it worked.
What strikes me about all of this is that this is happening in the late 80s. In the 90s, right around the time, or right in the buildup to the Clinton administration signing off and happening in Congress, the rescinding of the FinCEN laws. And because this is really a similar, dynamic. These were laws that existed in this country for about 70 years at the time that basically said you cannot own a movie theater if you're a movie studio, because you'll only feature movies from your own studio if you own the theater. And that's going to suck for people who want to see a bunch of different movies, or it's going to cost more to see a movie from a rival studio or something like that. And they have basically instituted in some, slightly different way, but the dynamic is it's basically like a financial interest syndication type of a relationship where they're getting paid on both ends and they're excluding anybody else, any type of competition whatsoever.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And actually, the gentleman from Jam Production, so there's one of the lone remaining independent concert promoters who didn't sell out to this network, really. It was called Clear Channel. First it was called SFX, and it was Clear Channel, then Live Nation, now Ticketmaster. In the 90s, they all kind of got rolled up and consolidated by this guy, Bob Sillerman. And one of the guys who didn't sell out owned a promoter called Jam Productions in Chicago. They've been really, really vocal about this whole issue. And they brought up the FinCEN laws yesterday and at the hearing, and gave some really great testimony.
Well, all right. So so we got that Pearl Jam situation. They also made an exception with the Grateful Dead, because the Grateful Dead, for people younger than I, they would be on the road for something like, I don't know, 340 days a year, it felt like. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to make sure that their fans, that Deadheads could get tickets, and that they were sort of like available through the relationship that the band had with their audience. And they ended up getting an exception, but that exception almost became sort of like a sacred vow that they would never, that Ticketmaster and whatever iteration it was in would never extend to anybody else. Can you tell us about that, Mo?
I don't think that Pearl Jam was totally aware of what had happened, because the Dead did have to threaten to sue, and they had to have some pretty high-priced lawyers. And you have to think about, the Dead was not beholden to any aspect of the music industry. They were, they didn't really believe in intellectual property. They made all their money through touring. They mailed all of their tickets to their fan clubs personally. I mean, they had this whole operation. They were very vertically integrated operation.
On that note, Mo, it's like helpful for people to know who are my age or younger. They had their own ticketing service, the Grateful Dead ticketing service, and they would do really funny things, like put an entire row of people named Brian in their doors, which is like ridiculous. But they had a personal relationship with everyone, and people loved their service. And
they were, I think, certainly the biggest band, if not the only band, that would actively encourage people to come in, record the concert. They would have like special areas where, the folks would come in with full on rigs, like you'd have a 10-foot pole with microphones and record these, and so they were a completely different sort of like animal. And even they had to struggle with this. That's the amazing thing about it.
Yeah, I found that incredible as well, because they really, their relationships with the concert promoters, this is another thing that was a departure from Pearl Jam. Their relationship with these concert promoters like Don Law way predated the existence of Ticketmaster. They'd been doing this since the 60s. So, but Fred Rosen, bless his heart, he tried to get up in there and say that they would not be able to play any of the venues that Ticketmaster repped if they didn't give Ticketmaster all the tickets. Now they did eventually carve out an exception, but they weren't about to do it for Pearl Jam.
So the next big sort of fight after Pearl Jam comes with Aerosmith. Can you walk us through that one?
Well, Aerosmith, I think, Steve Tyler had gotten clean in the 80s and sort of gone on this comeback mission. And he really wanted to, the little guy to get access to his tickets. And he was reading headlines about kids spending, camping out all night and not getting any tickets, getting kind of turned away. And he went to Ticketmaster to try and do something like the Grateful Dead did, because they had a pretty thriving fan club, and be able to kind of distribute the tickets themselves, a certain portion, 50% of the tickets themselves, to the fan clubs. Fred Rosen said, what about we raise the price of the ticket $2 and you can have $1, something like that. Basically tried to buy him off his manager, I should say. And that sort of, when Pearl Jam, and this was something that is sort of, when Pearl Jam decided to take on this battle, Aerosmith was one of the bands that stood up and said, yes, absolutely. I've got your back. REM was up there. Garth Brooks was up there. Even U2. Notably, a lot of these guys have joined the dark side, but it's not particularly surprising given how much more power they have amassed, especially since CD sales are not, they're a fraction of what they were. Physical music sales have sort of evaporated, and thus Live Nation Ticketmaster is the most powerful company in music.
I think on that note, one thing we didn't include in the article, but we had a lot we wished we did, was this acquisition of Instant Live, where I think it was Clear Channel, bought the patent to record the live concert and then sell immediately at an incredibly discounted price at all.
Uh-oh.
Krista's frozen.
Oh, no.
So Krista, sorry, we lost you for a moment.
And am I back? Okay.
Yeah, you're back. So wait a second. You were saying that that Clear Channel had this outfit called Instant Live. They would record the thing and then put it out live quickly. And so what happened to that outfit?
So they just completely undercut all the CD or album sales that artists actually made money off of. And that was in like 2001, 2002, I believe. And it just stripped them of that revenue stream.
And did the bands have to sign off on that? Or was it like, oh, this just comes with the, if you play in this venue, you got to do this?
With the venue. Yeah, exactly.
It comes with the package.
So they're completely disempowered in this instance. They're just watching this conglomeration between the relationship between the venues and Ticketmaster and really a radio company, essentially, or just basically pull different parts of their revenue streams just away from them without any ability to deal with it whatsoever. I also learned from your piece that the Aerosmith, they did that at one point in the run up to them sort of trying to make this push, they had done a survey of like all the people in the front row of their concerts, and every single person there had bought it from a scalper.
This was, the Forum in LA. It was the front section. Every single person in the front section of the Forum in LA had purchased their tickets from a scalper. And the Forum was actually that venue is managed by MCA. MCA in a contract that they got under Irving Azoff, who would later become Ticketmaster's CEO. So it's this little clique, and they saw this from the beginning. Their vision was that we are the middleman between the artist and the fan. This is not a business about selling music. This is not a business about moving records or CDs. It is a business about controlling access to the fans, and we have this. And in 1990, Azoff's chief publicist goes into business with Fred Rosen, and they brag about the 33 million person database that they have, and how they can, they're basically going to give corporations access to all of these incredibly passionate fans. And I don't even know if that would be legal today, but these guys have never really worried too much about what the law has to say.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, I should say it's almost difficult to sort of wrap your head around about this, or for me, about this whole this whole question of Ticketmaster and its various iterations as they sort of like go and hoover up their competitors, and also sort of like not just their direct competitors, but on sort of like both sides of where they would be having to negotiate with different people, is that there's the from a policy standpoint, there's this huge amount of like of antitrust questions that we have as a society ignored, really starting in 1980 or so, around that time when the Borkian version of antitrust sort of took over. But there's also just like so much corruption, like just really like almost petty criminal activity, except for the dollar amounts are larger, that gets like sort of like laced into that story in a way. So it's hard to sort of tease out like, but it feels like one begets the other.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. The thing is, I have covered finance and business for kind of my entire like journalistic career, and there's so much overlap between organized crime type stuff and antitrust, monopoly, the way that monopolies operate. These when a company gets so powerful, the retaliation always kind of, the lawsuits you read always sound like somebody's been watching too many mafia movies. That's just kind of the recurring theme over and over again. You see it in pharma, you see it in every aspect of the healthcare. I mean, the healthcare system is completely, mafia centric in the same way, but for sure, these gentlemen also have legit mafia connections that have been the subject of numerous books. I mean, Azoff and Rosen definitely had a lot of underworld figures swimming around them, and in the best example, coming up with the Pearl Jam issue, they hired a guy, or they seem to have hired a guy, the Ticketmaster, named Marty Bergman, who was the brother of a very famous 60 Minutes producer, Lowell Bergman, who touted himself, he held himself out as sort of his brother's advance man, and that he was working on this massive 60 Minutes expose on the concert ticketing industry, and they were going to really get Ticketmaster. And he ingratiated himself to the entire congressional staff that was doing the investigation on the Congress side, the DOJ, a lot of antitrust litigators that were working on the private side. And it turned out he was on the payroll of Ticketmaster. He bragged about it. Yeah. His wife, who was an ex-prosecutor, and by the way, they were married. Their marriage was officiated by Rudy Giuliani. And this guy was also an old friend of Fred Rosen's. He later bragged about how he had single-handedly stopped the antitrust investigation. But what people who knew him, who had made the mistake of sharing their information with this guy Marty Bergman, told me is that after they would talk to him, weird things would start to happen. And so we got these reports, two reports, neither one knew about the other, from opposite coasts of the country, of mysterious break-ins happening in offices and like documents going missing. So there was a lot. I mean, I found this quote from Eddie Vedder. He said, it was great to find out what it's like to be crushed by a huge corporate superpower. And he called the defeat, this is in 2000, a template for how politics works. When you put that template onto an issue like the environment or taking jobs out of the country, then it becomes really frightening. And this was in the context of him supporting Ralph Nader's campaign for presidency in 2000. But it was really, I think that everybody that I talked to on the Pearl Jam side was like, it was this moment of real just loss of innocence for them. I think they really thought that the Clinton administration were allies. They'd certainly raised a lot of money for the Clinton administration, and they felt like they'd sort of been hung out to dry. And they're still, a lot of them are still piecing together what exactly happened, because there were so many weird, mysterious things. At one point, wow. Charlie Black, the fixer who sort of the lobbyist who kind of got the whole thing, took care of the whole thing, and he was also running Phil Graham's presidential campaign. He had a lobbying firm with Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. And Roger Stone at one point was trying to get Pearl Jam to hire him. So it was very, very weird stuff.
There's sort of like it's almost like where, an offer you can't refuse becomes sort of like a double entendre, right? Like, I mean, it's like literally both the sort of the nature of a monopoly and in some respects a monopsony they have created, and also then you have guys who are coming in and breaking into your offices if you have information that you might be giving to congressional hearings. All right, well, so let's talk about the hearings we heard yesterday. It's a different era, and that era was in the wake of a change in the perspective that both our government and sort of like the conventional wisdom had on monopolies. And like I said, it led up, I think it was in 96, where they rolled back the FinCin laws that had to do with entertainment, and studios could now own the same thing, or I should say networks could own the material that they were producing out in California, in Hollywood. Things have swung back with this administration. So what did we hear yesterday? Maybe like, I'm curious, as to like how serious you think they're going to go at Ticketmaster, both the administration and it's, I guess starting with the Senate hearings, who was also revealed yesterday. Like, Josh Hawley, everybody was waiting for his like big, sort of populist coming out. And it seems like he wasn't quite as, he didn't quite bring the goods that he sort of like that people anticipated. Krista, give me your sense of that.
I would say his questioning was very specifically targeted around like the secondary market, essentially, and this data capture. He kept referencing how much data they gather in their secondary market. But I think he clearly was versed in some of the issues of the platform. And I completely agree with you. Not necessarily the populist caring much about the artist at all, really only worried about the fan. But the thing that struck me about this hearing overall is the fact that there was a lot of bipartisan agreement that this whole entire kind of company has gotten away with, and the artists have not been heard really. When they have spoken out, there's been a lot of silencing, and the agreement between the bipartisan support is that we need to do something about it. And that closing off with Klobuchar saying, this isn't really about throwing popcorn, we're really trying to do something here, should at least give the agencies support in whatever comes next.
Mo, from your perspective, like, what is the value of going after one of these monopolies? And I have to say, like, in terms of like Hawley, the way I read that was, when you go after data, what you're also doing is you're sticking to the line that it's big tech is the problem, as opposed to the big part, as opposed, relative to the tech part. There's which I'm all in favor of. I'm happy the DOJ is now suing Google, and they should all these companies should be broken into million pieces. But there is a sort of like that flavor is more attractive right now to Republicans. I'm interested in sort of the generic attack on that bigness. Mo, from your sense, what is the value of going after Ticketmaster beyond, obviously, like, it's important that we have music in our society and that artists be able to make a living at it, and that these things are accessible to fans, but the going after this type of monopoly what does it do for other monopolies, I guess?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, the first thing, because there is that pushback, like, oh, they're interested in going after Ticketmaster. What about the supermarket chains? What about hospital monopolies? And I do a lot of work on hospital monopolies. And that's one of the reasons I was really upset. The one thing that really left me disappointed yesterday is that nobody brought up Astroworld. One of the biggest harms inflicted by hospital monopolies is that people die every minute in American hospitals from just sheer neglect. And a lot of that is because there is no, all of the competition has been consolidated out of existence. Now, competition is not going to solve our healthcare problems, but where it doesn't exist, your healthcare is prison-like. I've done a lot of work on rural healthcare, and the case with a lot of Live Nation shows, what I've seen is that post-pandemic, like a lot of institutions, they've been all about understaffing, undertraining. At Astroworld, there was actually a security guard who blew the whistle. He said, "I left early. I left before Travis Scott's show because
I'm sorry. Will you tell people about Astroworld, because I'm not sure that people know what you're referring to.
In November 2021, there was a concert that Live Nation put on in conjunction with Travis Scott. Drake was involved in Houston at an abandoned amusement park called Astroworld. And 10 people died, including a 9-year-old child. Hundreds were injured. And the fault, a lot of fault has been pinned on Travis Scott, because he continued to play his set through what, clearly ambulances sort of arriving on the scene. He didn't stop the music. The performance didn't actually stop until 8 people were dead. But Live Nation is the culprit there. He was on stage. He couldn't necessarily see. I don't really know what it's like to perform before, tens of thousands of people. And it emerged, pretty quickly that Live Nation not only had not appointed an executive producer or a director of concerts, there was really nobody appointed at that concert to a role that would have enabled them to stop the concert. But it had just, dramatically understaffed the event, potentially oversold the tickets, which is also something that they're accused of doing in the Bad Bunny situation in Mexico, where a bunch of thousands of fans got turned away at the door, even though they'd purchased tickets. So they're overbooking like the airplanes. And there was just no crowd control. There was very, very bad security. 6 weeks after Astroworld, a rapper named Drakeo the Ruler got assassinated by literally a mob of 113 people wearing ski masks and red hoodies. Jumped on this guy and stabbed him to death. And he was dead long before the paramedics arrived. So Live Nation is understaffing its events. It's cutting corners. It's really in this environment where we have mass shootings every other week. It's a recipe for disaster. Obviously, the largest, or maybe not so obviously, but the deadliest mass shooting in history also happened at a Live Nation event. That was the Route 91 Fest. So they're cutting corners on security. It's going to cost more lives. And that's an element of this kind of monopoly control that wasn't addressed yesterday. But I think that that sort of brings us, it brings me back to why this kind of thing needs to really be stopped. I hope that I wish that Ted Cruz had actually been there yesterday, because he's been pretty good at hearings on Boeing. I think that that's another thing that I hope that we can get the senators to kind of come to bipartisan, agreement on, is that, monopolies, lack of competition is actually threatens lives.
And we should say, we've followed a lot of the nurses' strikes that have happened over the past couple of years now, and almost to a strike. The primary issue is not pay. It is we need more nurses. Because we can't have 20 people. We just had one in New York. We had one. We were following one quite closely up in Worcester. We need more nurses for the amount of patients we have. And you're a nurse. You work in the ER. You can't see 20 patients in an hour. Somebody's gonna die, essentially, if that's the case. And just so that we're clear, can you just the relationship between Ticketmaster and Live Nation? They're essentially one entity.
Yeah, they're the same company. That's something that sort of blows people's mind. And again, Live Nation was Clear Channel. Clear Channel is now iHeartRadio and Live Nation. But all of these entities are very clear. iHeartRadio had the same for a time. They had the same parent company, Liberty Media. You might as well consider the entire entertainment industry one, but no, Live Nation and Ticketmaster have since 2010 been the same company, and before that they were sort of the same company.
And where does iHeartRadio fit in? Have they been spun off, or are they also part of what's their relationship?
They were spun off. They were bought up by private equity. They were then, they went bankrupt.
Sirius XM is still in the picture.
Sirius XM, yeah, but iHeartRadio then was purchased by John Malone's Liberty Media, which also owns 37% of Live Nation. But then Liberty Media is divested from iHeartRadio. I don't know how close the iHeartRadio Live Nation connection is at this point, but it would be, I think, naive to suggest there's none at all.
So, Krista, what is the solution here? What authority does the DOJ have, let's say, or, and I guess this would maybe come out in the form of a suit or a threatened suit. And maybe there's legislation, but what authority exists and what policies are on the table to deal with this concentration of power that is just basically running this industry?
Yeah, I think that it's important. Mo and I are both we just sounded very pessimistic about the hearing. I actually think it overall went pretty well. If we had looked at this from 20 years ago, this went very well. The guy, John Edgell, who ran the hearing back in the 90s, he was excited about this one. So I will first lay that out. But in terms of what can be done, it is action from the DOJ. And as American Antitrust Institute, one of the witnesses said yesterday, this really needs to be a structural separation, which would result from a formal lawsuit from the Department of Justice. It would have to make it past all of the attempts from Live Nation, I'm sure, to get it dismissed and then head to trial. And ultimately, it would be up to a judge. But what a structural separation looks like to me, at least a somewhat successful one, would be separating the concert promotion company, Live Nation, from Ticketmaster, and then also separating their artist management company, Frontline Management, that they bought in 2008, which was an Azoff company, Irving Azoff, and then You also would probably need to put restrictions around their exclusivity, because that is how they have been able to maintain their power thus far. And, they had exclusivity with each other from the 90s onwards before merging. So to invite actual competition and investment in new companies that can innovate and kind of gain market share and to be a competitor, you would need to put guardrails up like that. And I hope the DOJ knows that.
So no buying exclusivity. Like, you can't come in and say, you're only going to deal with Ticketmaster. Here's a kickback in advance. Here's $500,000. Here's $5 million, whatever it is. You can't do that. That you also can't own both the outlet and the sales, or a substantial piece of the artist in the form of being their agent. I mean, we saw this in there was a big writers' strike to this end to break up that relationship between agencies and studios, essentially, who were double dealing and cutting out the interests of the people who are actually providing the content. And we should just also say, just so that we're clear, the hearings, they in themselves are really just sort of like northern stars for the DOJ, right? It's basically just signaling to the DOJ, if you pursue this, you're not going to get blowback from the legislative branch. You're going to have trouble on the courts, obviously, to the extent that you do. And maybe it indicates that maybe, the Senate will, be putting more people on the courts who are going to be more amenable to these type of cases. But really, the primary thing is, you're not going to get a call and get reamed out by a senator who's going to start to apply pressure on you. And it just basically gives like a vague green light for the DOJ. And then the DOJ is pretty clearly already oriented towards dealing with antitrust. And this is just like a sort of a green flag, or whatever color flag, I guess, you get in a car race, saying go forward with it.
In my mind, yeah, for the most part, it's that. There are some legislative changes that they've introduced or thought about introducing, the Boss Act being one of them, and they discussed it briefly, which is just around like ticketing transparency, but that won't get at the deeper harms. And again, as you said, it's more of a green light hearing to say, these are the issues that people in the industry are talking about. I'm so glad they had an artist and an independent venue to kind of highlight the things that within the industry people are seeing. And then, yeah, like, go forth, please file a lawsuit.
Well,
and to that end, the DOJ, followed up the hearing by immediately filing another lawsuit against Alphabet, the parent of Google, using a lot of the allegations that you saw, and a lot of the material that you saw emerge in the House Antitrust Subcommittee investigation. So, yeah, we're hoping that these wheels start turning in that right direction. It's important to note that the Senate is where the antitrust investigation that Pearl Jam launched went to die, right? The Senator Phil Gramm, froze the appropriations, or allegedly he claims that this is not the case, or he's claimed that it couldn't have happened that way. But we don't think that the Senate anymore is that ideologically pro-monopoly. So that is definitely an amazing thing.
The piece, if folks want to go check it out at the American Prospect, which I would highly recommend. It was, it's really, it's like it honestly does feel like Goodfellas on some level. It's called Ticketmaster's Dark History. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Krista Brown, Moe Tkacik, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This is awesome.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the program now, wherein we will take your phone calls. We will do your IMs. We will talk about a bunch of other stuff, right? Yeah, sure. Of course.
If you want.
We were scheduled to have a second guest today, president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, out, where was this, in
Loudoun County, Virginia.
In Loudoun County, Virginia, talk about their strike. He wasn't able to make it. Ray Jackson wasn't able to make it. So But I was happy to have that conversation because this is a big deal. I mean, both in the sort of like narrow confines, and not that narrow, like all music essentially is dictated by this. Like, and the thing is that the music you hear on a daily basis, you don't necessarily understand like what it does to how much music is available to you and the variety of music, because of the structure of this business will eliminate opportunities for you to hear music that's out there and eliminate opportunities for musicians to make money and for people to get inspired to become musicians. And so this is if it was only about that, it would be a big deal. But it's also about a larger movement to sort of to get rid of monopolies, whether that's, things like Google, whether it's things like Facebook, Meta, whether it's things like the airline industry or the deregulation that has gone on there, whether it's hospitals, all of these things. Once these principles start to get like sort of adopted, and once they become sort of like a part of the fabric of our society again, you start to see these problems all across the board. And, it not only does it help in terms of like, it's not just a consumer thing. It helps consumers, but it also helps us as citizens in terms of like having like a wider array of opportunities for music and art and whatnot, but also it makes a difference in terms of your health. And it also makes a huge difference in terms of our politics, because these entities not only amass market share, but when they amass market share in monopolies, they also amass political power. And they use this political power, and it is never, ever, ever to the benefit of democracy, both in terms of a process, but also in terms of outcomes. So this is really important stuff. And even if your politics are significantly to the left of these type of sort of like, I wouldn't call them technocratic, I would call them structural fixes. But even if you are not interested in reforms as an endpoint, understand that the diminishment of corporate concentrated power is, I would argue, a prerequisite to any even like greater structural change when you talk about decommodifying things. So if you are interested in a communist revolution or a socialist revolution or a evolution to socialism, I don't think that is possible. You need more things. It's insufficient, right? You need, you need a class consciousness and an awareness, but you also, not only do you need to strengthen the forces that you want to promote this thing, you need to diminish the strength of forces that are inhibiting these changes. And this is where this is that half of that ledger.
Yeah, and I think like if this is the route of least resistance that like American government has taken against capitalism throughout its history because of the setup of the country. But it's when I think like participating in it is important, and like I still think of this book I read, The Lords of Creation or something like that. I'll get the link of it by this guy in the 30s. But it's a good thing that we got rid of this free market capitalism, and that was a genuine improvement and made the economy work better for everybody generally. And the problem was that we thought it was over then. But
yes,
that work was really important.
But you don't get the New Deal. You don't get FDR without Teddy going after the trusts. The trusts had to go first, I think, before you got to things like Social Security, things like the WPA, all of the things that came within the New Deal. Housing, loan authority, all of that stuff was because the trusts were, the concentrations of these economic and then ultimately political power. This is when we talk about, a plutonomy becoming a plutocracy. And you need to attack that plutonomy to undercut the plutocracy. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member today. We are completely unfunded by millionaires or billionaires. Or to the extent that we have any millionaires or billionaires, they're doing it at $10 a month.
Yeah, they're not doing their fair share.
Let's put it that way. It's conceivable that we have a billionaire or millionaire
on the basic level
who's like a majority reporter.
I'd be so annoyed if I looked at the Left Reckoning rolls and saw Jack Dorsey, but he was only at $4 a month.
That would be
first a billionaire pays me and it's not even paying me that much.
Exactly. But it's unlikely. But let's put it that way. We have no investors in this company. We have none of that. The only, I guess, corporate money that we get is advertisers. So you can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only allow this show to survive and thrive, you get the free half, free of commercials, and then you get the fun half, and then you get little bennies on the app side, little tiny things. We're gonna try and add, here and there. And don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. It is a co-op, folks. That means it's employee owned, and they're also really great with their providers. Matt, what's happening with the Matt Leck media?
Yeah, last night on Left Reckoning, I talked with Andy Perez about his Buttigieg and I can't say Buttigieg,
you just
and
did.
Airlines thing, and I know, but I don't want to. And Pfizer renting a Semaphore for its what credibility it has. Check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. David and I will have a Patreon show for you this Sunday.
Ooh, Semaphore is going to be in some big, they're going to have some real problems. They just lose a third of their funding from Sam Bankman-Fried or whatever that
well, they'll take it from wherever they can get it, I guess.
I guess so. And ESPN, Bradley, what's on tomorrow?
So we will be previewing the conference finals from the NFL, doing our picks for the week with just 2 games. Actually, 3 games total, but 2 games to go this weekend. I'm still up on Emma and our season-wide betting challenge, and hoping to keep that streak going into the weekend. So youtube.com/ESPN show tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Phone number 646-257-3920. We will turn the phone machine on right now, actually. How about that? So 646-257-3920. We will take your phone calls. Bye-bye. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this.